with Otello, John Vickers. Welcome back to Houston.
Thank you. It's a very great pleasure to be back.
The last time most of us saw you live was when you did Peter Grimes here in Houston.
Mm-hmm.
And there are great similarities, perhaps in the roles, in the concept of Othello, the concept of Peter Grimes, men of alienation, especially the way you portray them on the stage. Of course, these are things that we see as members of the audience, but I was wondering, how do you see these two roles with which you become so closely identified?
Well, personally, I think they're light years apart. They're light years apart, both dramatically and vocally. The point that you mentioned, that they are alienated personalities. I take some exception to that. I mean, there's no question, of course, that Peter Grimes is a very alienated personality. He's ostracized by a community. But in the case of Othello, this isn't true. Othello is loved and adored and worshipped and complimented, and he has been elevated to a position of such power and that it led to his downfall. Like in the second act of Othello, Othello says, and after proof, Othello's laws are supreme. And he's lost sight of reality. When any man starts to say that, when any person of authority starts to believe that his authority is so great that his decisions are supreme, he's on very shaky ground.
Well, you sound as if this could have been written by Aeschylus, not by either Shakespeare or Boito. Going back to the classical sense of hubris. Yes. and tragedy. Mm-hmm. The starkness, the focus of the Greeks on that quality of a man rather than the passion and tearing the passion.
All the elements of what you refer to as great Greek tragedy are present in Othello. And from my standpoint, the only thing that interests me really in the whole field of opera is to delve into the depths of the understanding, trying to understand the minds and the psyches of the human beings that I portray. Whether it's Vašek, whether it's Othello, whether it's Grimes, it makes no difference to me. And I believe with my whole heart that this was also what Giuseppe Verdi struggled with too and wrestled with. And this is what Boito wrestled with, this is what Shakespeare wrestled with. They went way beyond the mere superficiality of words, of stage direction, of counterpoint and form. The techniques that they used were merely put at the disposal of a greater revelation. And that's the essence of art.
I would imagine then, with this idea in your mind as to what you're looking for in a role, well, it eliminates a lot of roles.
I'm not so sure. You know, there are misconceptions that grow up around roles. For instance, when I sang Forza dello Stino in the Metropolitan Opera, I was criticized pretty severely by the New York critics because they said I'd been miscast. And I was miscast because the tenor became the focal point of the opera. The whole story of La Forza dello Stino are the powers of fate, of destiny, that buffet the man. And they buffet the tenor. You know, that's the story. So there are misconceptions that grow up around roles. And also there are different ways of portraying them. When I decided to do Vašek, I shouldn't say I decided to do it, I was asked to do it by John Dexter. And I thought it would be a great challenge for me because I had been so very much cast in the heavies that I wasn't sure that people had any thought that I could paint with a more delicate brush. And it was a great challenge to me to take on this totally different type of personality. But I approached Vašek with the same kind of probing observations and research that I did in any other roles. I mean, Vašek is a classic comic figure. And, it was a thrill to, in my opinion, reveal Vašek as the only really true, warm, honest, loving person in the whole opera.
I was watching you with the children on the Carousel, and you were enjoying yourself.
Well, as Vašek, I was enjoying myself. I projected myself into the childlike mind of Vašek and saw that whole circus performance with the wonderment and the innocence of a child.
Have you done any other comic roles, or are there any comic roles you'd like to do that you haven't been able to do for that particular element?
Oh, not really, and I'll never do Vašek again. It was just a very interesting and wonderful challenge.
I understand at one point, I don't know if you still feel this way, I was thinking of another, like one could call it a cameo role, a character role, the witch in Hansel and Gretel.
Well, I've often thought that we'd fun to do that. As a matter of fact, at one point in my career, as a matter of fact, it was on the occasion of Herbert von Karajan's debut in the Metropolitan. I was with Karajan in the Metropolitan singing Siegmund, and there was a new production of the Hansel and Gretel being put on the Metropolitan at the same time, and Nat Merrill, who was producing it, asked me if I'd do the old witch, and I said I'd just love to. But Mr. Bing, who was Sir Rudolph Bing at the Metropolitan, who was the manager at that time, just said that I didn't have a good enough sense of humor. And, excuse me, and I've always, I've laughed about it a little bit. And, when I'm talking here, we've become so heavy and philosophical and, esoteric in our conversation. I think a lot of our listeners will think I haven't any sense of humor also.
That's not at all true. A last question. Again, maintaining this thread of choices, of roles, and you speak of challenges, artistic challenges. What role would you most like to do? Would you consider to be your next major challenge? Or like to be one?
Well, people ask me that now all the time, but when you have had a major career and a long one, the repertoire, when you look across the whole panorama of the repertoire, of course there is challenge in any role that one chooses to do, but I think it's pretty much admitted that the Mount Everest of the Wagnerian repertoire is Tristan, and the Mount Everest of the Italian repertoire is Othello, and the Mount Everest of the French repertoire is Aeneas in Les Troyens. And so when you ask me what would I like to do, it's a terrible thing to say and sounds very arrogant, but I have climbed the highest mountains. And that is why it was such a joy to take on Vašek, because that wasn't a mountain at all. Do you follow me? It was a molehill. It was a cameo. After painting vast canvases, I suddenly had to paint a cameo. You know what I
Yes.
mean? And the challenge is the same whether you paint a vast canvas or a cameo. But it's very difficult for me to really answer your question. My great wish is that I could, by some miracle, have the kind of a vocal instrument that tomorrow I could sing the evangelist in the St. Matthew Passion. The Almighty has not given me that kind of voice, although I have sung the evangelist a number of times when I was a much younger man. But even then it wasn't the right voice.
Well,
I understand.
I have a sense that perhaps what you're saying is that not that each new role is a challenge, but every time you do any role, it's going to have that same challenge.
Oh, absolutely.
I mean, to climb Everest the second time is as hard as climbing it the first time.
Oh, yes, and sometimes worse, sometimes more difficult. And you have to escape the parallel that we're using. In matter of fact, each successive performance is more difficult. It's not less difficult, because if you do not continue to grow, then you slide backwards. And an audience that has seen you and seen you and seen you, they're not satisfied. Absolutely, on the contrary, they are totally dissatisfied if you remain on a level, because in their mind you're slipping back, because you cease to thrill them. Perhaps I make too strong a case, but I fundamentally believe that to be true, because I also believe it to be true that if, for instance, you brought back some of the great singers of a few generations ago and put them on the stages today, they would not be revered, because the singers today are greater singers and greater performers.
What makes them so?
Because they've had all the advantages. Singers are a product of their time. There was a time in history when it was sort of marveled at that singers had 3 or 4 registers in their voices, and they went through those registers like a great truck changing gears. There was a period in which I think I grew up and have lived my career where at least one school of thought, to which I certainly belonged, that it was essential that the voice should be one voice from top to bottom. That no one section of the voice should ever be sacrificed for another. That is the essence, in my mind, of the meaning of bel canto. Bel canto is not screaming high notes. Bel canto is beautiful singing. Björling, Bergonzi, Valetti, as tenors, Siepi, these were bel canto singers. Giulietta Simeonato. There was an evenness of voice.
In a way, it makes a sort of an effortless impression on us. It's certainly not
Yes.
effortless.
Effortless impression on the listener. And to me, that is the ultimate technique, because the technique is absolutely invisible. Yes.
It's absolutely. In a way, you have described your own performance as I think we.
Oh, that's very
see
nice.
it,
Thank you.
As we
that's
see it.
very, very kind.
I won't say.
That's very, very nice of you.
It struck me as an irony watching the several performances of Othello and of Grimes too, but I think more of Othello, I guess because of the music itself, at how effortless your voice was, and yet there's this incredible tension of the character of Othello. It's as if they ought to be working against each other. And but in a way, I guess I think that, again.
Well, I worked even harder, of course, at keeping the voice pretty relaxed here, because I had 4 Othellos in 8 days, and that is foolhardy, really.
That can be also very rough on Desdemona.
Yes, it's true.
Okay, speaking of Othello and Desdemona, I think we should return to the stage of Jones Hall for Acts 3 and 4 of Othello. John Vickers, wonderful talking with you on this broadcast.
Thank you. It was a pleasure to be here. Thank you.